All right, so in this section, I'm going to give you two different analogies for how to think about ASL as a language and the basics of how we structure the language. Now, everybody loves a good baked good. I am personally a huge donut fan. Donuts are my favorite. But for this analogy, I am going to use cake. And credit where credit is due, this is an analogy that I stole from the fabulous Sean Olmstead. So if you haven't seen our beautiful redheaded teacher yet, you will soon. So let's bake a cake. When we're talking about baking a cake, there are basically I know there are lots of different ingredients in cakes, but we're going to talk about these four main ingredients: flour, sugar, eggs, and salt. Okay. We are using real eggs. So this is not a vegan cake. Sorry, guys. Eggs. Okay. So if you're looking at the ingredients, they're in order of what you would use the most of to what you would use the least of, right? So we would use the most flour. Next would be sugar, a couple of eggs, and just a pinch of salt. Remember, salt is in baked goods to enhance the flavor, but if you put too much, you ruin it. And if you don't put any, it's not quite as good as it could be. So we need it, but we only need a very, very small amount, okay? Now, if we look at ASL, let's look at the ingredients of ASL. The ingredients of ASL include signs, okay? Signs are what we would be referred to as prescriptive elements, okay? Then we have something called depiction. Now, depiction covers a lot of different things, but these are elements that we would refer to as descriptive elements. So they're very visual. They're going to include things like classifiers, which we're going to learn about. And if you've taken ASL before, you've heard about. Okay, they're going to include gestures. One of my favorite things is when students say, oh, I know ASL, and then they flick me off. That's a gesture. That's not a sign. And there are lots of universally understood gestures that deaf people implement into their language, but it doesn't mean they're signs, like this. That's actually not a sign. That's a gesture for come here. English people would understand it. Hearing people would understand it. Deaf people would understand it. Spanish-speaking individuals would probably understand that gesture of come over here, or this gesture. Okay? It's not actually a sign. It's a gesture for shh or quiet, okay? And we use those in ASL, and they have a lot of value in ASL. And you have more of that than you think. And I'm going to give you an example in a minute that will help you understand that, okay? But depiction is something that is unique to ASL. It's not something that we necessarily have in other languages and is very important, okay? Then we have non-manual markers, also very important. When it comes to communication, even spoken communication, our body language, our facial expressions, and the way we inflect or intonate what we say holds a lot of meaning. You all can even understand this if you look at your text threads and you get that K in a text thread. Well, is that a okay K, or is that like a K with an eye roll? It's so infuriating. We don't know, because we don't know what that person looked like or sounded like when they said that. We just have that text information, right? So without non-manual markers, which would include things like our facial expression, our body movement, our eyebrow movements, our mouth morphemes, and all the ways that we inflect things in ASL. Without those, we lose a lot of meaning. And then the last thing is finger spelling, which we talked about being a part of ASL, and it's great if some of you already know ASL, but that's not all ASL is. It's only a very small part, okay? So we start to look at, okay, well, what's our flour, what's our sugar, salt, and eggs when it comes to ASL? Initially, right, flour is the most, and a lot of people will initially think, oh, well, signs are our flour, right? Actually, no, our flour is our non-manual markers, right? Because again, without it, we lose so much meaning, right? If I take a sentence like, that shirt looks good, okay, and the vocabulary never changes, that shirt looks good, but the way I say it changes, I change the meaning, right? So that shirt looks good versus that shirt looks good versus that shirt looks good. All of those are the same vocab, same syntax, but changed by inflection, which are non-manual markers in ASL, right? So again, that shirt looks good, so versus. Okay, all of that is changed in our non-manual markers. Okay, so that's our flower. We need that the most. Now, what sweetens our ASL, again, not the signs, but our depiction, our visual elements, our things that we elevate our language with, okay? So I'm actually gonna give you an example using the sign for eggs, okay? So the sign for egg is egg in ASL, okay? So now crack an egg in ASL. You guys go ahead and try that. So this is the sign, egg. How would you crack an egg in ASL? Okay, gave you a few seconds. Now I'm sure some of you were trying to use this sign to in some way crack the egg, right? If you just knock it. Do you know how we crack an egg in ASL? Ready? So if I had asked you all to charades cracking an egg, you would have been able to do that without knowing the sign for egg at all. And I would have understood you very clearly. Okay. That's depiction. That's the idea of gesturing and using some of those mining techniques that you already have inside you to make your language more visually appealing. Okay. Now, speaking of eggs are our signs. Because if I'm just gesturing and using facial expressions in my body, then what I'm really doing is just playing charades if I don't have any signs. So this is how we would crack an egg in ASL, but I have to first tell you that it's an egg. I can't just go and gesture my way through something. That's just miming, right? So eggs bind the ingredients together. Signs bind all of these elements together. Without signs, you're baking a vegan cake. We've all had vegan baked goods. Some of them are well done, but they're still not real baked goods. Don't at me. Okay. And the last thing is our salt, which is our finger spelling. So again, we need it. We need it for proper nouns. We need it for clarity, but we only need a very small amount of it or we kind of ruin it. It's not as visually appealing. The cake's flavor is off if we have too much